Hey, hey, Judy.
Hey Lisa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Well, it's not
Good.
really day anymore, is it?
No, I see it's dark outside.
It is dark outside, but when I was driving home a little while ago, an hour and a half ago, I noticed that it's not as dark as it used to be.
And I've been walking the dog at like 4:30 because it's too dark by 5 o'clock. Well, today it wasn't dark at 5 o'clock, and I'm thinking,
Yay!
ooh, it's getting lighter. Yay. I know we went past the winter solstice, which was, the longest day of the year. So we're coming out the other side, and
I
I'm
know, it
delighted.
feels so good to be coming out the other side. It really, really does.
Whenever
And
that happens, I always feel like there's hope for spring.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It just feels like, yeah, as you said, we're on the other side, and that other side feels brighter.
Yeah, like, and just having that little bit more light, I like a lot. I mean, getting dark at 4:30 really blows my day.
Oh, I mean, and during the summertime when, it's late, it's light until 9:30. If you go outside and it's quarter to 5, it feels like it's like 1:30 in the afternoon
It does. Yep.
because there's no sense of it being anywhere near evening.
Well, and now you go outside at 4:30 and it feels like it's 9 o'clock at night and it feels terrible. I know. And I kind of turn into a mushroom too, so I have to be real careful not to just give it up because it's dark outside. So,
Oh, yeah, you do I feel like I definitely sleep more.
do you?
So, and that's not going to help me accomplish what I want to in 2024.
Well, I know we've been talking about that. So, Lisa, tell me, do.
Okay, so today's episode, I want to talk about the one area I don't think we've ever talked about before in
And that,
terms of goals. But I've always paid a lot of attention to this goal that other people have, and that
uh-huh.
is the goal of the reading list.
Hmm.
And the reading, I want to read so many books this year. I've
Hmm.
never set a goal like that for myself. Yet I know so many people do that. And I mean, one of my friends on Facebook, I used to teach with her. I mean, she blew her goal out of the water. I mean, she read like over 150 books this past year. It's like,
That's a
who's
lot of books.
that's a lot of books. I was like, how did she do that? Now, she may have done it like I used to. She may have listened to books
Hmm.
during her commute times and times that she was exercising and times that she's just puttering around the house.
Hmm.
That's a way to get in a lot of quote unquote reading without having to sit down and just
You know
focus.
what? I don't absorb it as well, though. When I'm listening to it, I don't absorb it as well as when I'm actually physically doing the exercise of reading the words in the book. So I'm still kind of hung up on books.
You know, I agree with you when it comes to nonfiction books. And
Hmm.
when it is a book about something I want to incorporate into my life, I definitely agree that I want to sit down and read that book. I want to have the physical, you know, copy in front of me.
You want the
Preferably, I
highlighter?
want to own that book.
Hmm. Yeah.
And but if it's a story, I want to listen to it. I don't want to spend my time reading it,
Oh,
sitting
that's
down.
interesting. I've never just made a connection, or a disconnection between the two, but
So
I'll have to think
it's
that through.
it's something that it's always been something that I've easily done. I never felt I needed to set a goal for myself in terms of how many books I should read because I've always read voraciously.
Hmm.
Now that I'm not commuting, however, I find myself reading less fiction,
Hmm.
but and even the nonfiction, I'm not finding the same amount of time to read it like I used to.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's like maybe this is the year I need to set or I want to set a goal for myself. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about why I'm going to set a goal for myself, why you should, in other words,
Hmm.
and some of the problems with that, and then why. Why should we do this? And I just thought we'd have a fun time talking about it because you've got um, an interesting story about, some of the
Shh. Oh, you can go ahead.
So anyway, like I said, I like to read both different kinds of books. I like to read fiction. I like to listen to fiction.
Mhm,
I like to read nonfiction.
mhm.
And I like to sometimes just kind of read odd stuff that,
Mhm.
I would never pick up myself until somebody said, here, you've got to read this, or this is
Uh-huh.
so interesting. So, and I think when I do that, I think it expands my horizons.
Mhm.
And it also, I think maybe one of the reasons I like to read the most is it makes me an interesting person. When somebody's
Well,
talking
you
about
definitely
something.
are that, Lisa. Definitely. Yeah. I've never felt so dull and boring in my life because one of the things that used to happen in our house was that Michael would read and then he would share what he read about, or he'd tell me the
Mhm.
story, or he'd talk to me about
Yes,
what he
exactly.
read. Now I have to do all that reading and talking all by myself. So Quincy doesn't read.
No, no, she doesn't. So and I've always enjoyed reading and then getting people to be excited about the story by telling the story. And you've talked about before about how we were sitting around the campfire and
Oh,
I was telling the story of the giver
you are
and
the best
how
stories.
how interesting I made that, where Matthew said he thought my telling of the story was better than actually the reading of the story.
He did.
So
He said that several times since then. He just could not get over the dynamic that you put into the telling of the story. He thought it was far more interesting than when the writer actually wrote the
maybe
book.
that partly is to the fact that I've had to entertain and educate, which is really the same thing, 6-year-olds for so many years. You
That's
really have to
possible.
make, information, you know,
Interesting. You have to make them
interesting.
want it badly.
Yeah, yeah. So that's
Yeah.
a skill that I perhaps honed. So,
Hmm.
so the other,
Well,
yep, you go.
oh, I was going to say the other thing I actually enjoy doing is going back once in a while and reading something that I read years ago. And
Mm,
like when we read Erroneous Zones last week, I
mhm.
was fascinated by how much of that book I had actually forgotten.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
my.
Yeah,
Huh.
and it was kind of cool to pick it back up and tell there's certain stories in that book that I had kind of forgotten. There were certain ones that I'd picked out and shared with other people, but it was good to pick it up again and have new fresh stories to tell. So that was kind of interesting too. And then I also loved the fact, and you talked about it last week, that the basic principles don't change.
No,
The languaging changes a little, the name changes, what group it's hot with changes and things like that. But the nonfiction, it really has a lot of similarity from year to year to year, decade to decade.
it does. It really does.
Hmm.
So when we were talking about reading and book lists, what was the last one? I was just looking at the Holderness family site, and she put down her, I think it was 12 or 15 books that she plans on reading this year. And some of them are books that, she's like, this isn't for me right now. This is definitely going to be a beach read this summer. So she's kind of like laid it out in terms of what season of one's life this book would be better for. And
Okay.
I don't know that I'd get that detailed.
Hmm.
Um, but I definitely think that it would be to my benefit to come up with a goal and some recommended books that I want to definitely hit this year.
Okay. And what will be your source of suggested titles?
Excellent question. Um, I thought, when I don't know what her first name is, but on the Holderness family site, when she was listing them out, I thought, a couple of those sounded good.
Hmm.
Caden, my son, he kind of got me going. He gave me a book a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Mom, I think you'd like this book. So he gave me the book, and it was called Normal People by some author. And and I sat down and was like, oh, this is good. And it was refreshing to be able to like I said, I hadn't read a fiction book in so long. So I came home from work. I chilled out and sat in the recliner, covered up with a blanket, and just read a few chapters. And it felt so luxurious. And it was
Reading is
lovely.
luxurious. I think it's something that, takes your mind away from all of those anxieties of the day and so on. And if you can lose yourself in a book, my biggest problem is when I start reading a book, I don't want to cook dinner. I don't want to do anything else. I want to just read that book. So it's going to be, PB&J tonight and a glass of milk. That might be it if I'm reading. I tend to not, especially nonfiction,
Yeah.
because I get,
No, see, I'm just the opposite with nonfiction. I like to read that in digestible chunks.
okay.
So I don't have the problem, um, you know, losing track of time, or, not making dinner, or, not wanting to go to sleep at night because of a nonfiction book. I find it motivating, and it's like, oh, I want to do this, but I don't have that same compulsion to read it like I do with fiction.
Okay. Well, I mean, when I read fiction, I get so into those characters, and they're like, I'm observing these people and what's going on in their life, and I want to know what they're doing next and now what's going to happen. And it's almost like a Hallmark movie on steroids. I've told you I've gotten so into those darn Hallmark movies that who would have known? But I think
Oh,
it's
you're
just
too
of
funny.
where I am in my life right now. And what I've started noticing is the same actors and
Are
actresses
in
are
all the same
showing
movies.
up.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is really is weird, because what it does is it makes me think, boy, is he fickle? How many women is he going to kiss in this Hallmark season? It's just kind of funny. I never noticed that ever before. So obviously I'm seeing more of them. But
Yes.
I think the fiction for me actually is almost like it's almost like an experience, and I almost jump from my life into their life, and it really is, how do I want to say it? It's refreshing, it's revitalizing to me, because it gets me out of my stuff and into somebody
Yeah.
else's.
Yeah. It's
So,
not necessarily cathartic that way, but it's almost like an anti-anxiety pill. It's like you're able to kind of compartmentalize your life over here, and you're able to move into the characters' lives and just go, yeah, their lives really, really suck. I mean,
well,
I
I
thought
think
I
I
had
got
issues.
problems. I'll keep mine. That's all
Hmm.
right. We won't
You know,
trade.
I don't know if you ever do this, but when I read, sometimes you ever come across just a phrase or a sentence or a paragraph that's just so beautifully written that you just go, "Oh, I love the way they wrote this."
Mhm.
I love that when that happens, when they've seen, when they've written something onto the page that's maybe something I've seen or heard or felt myself, but it really just feels eloquent.
They
And I,
describe it in a way that you never have and that you never thought
yes,
to have.
and it really hits home. And I go, oh, that's it opens me up. And I think that's so refreshing, and it just hits me somewhere where I go, it just feels so good to read well turned prose.
Mhm, mhm. I think that's very true. And I know that I was very fortunate when I took freshman English when I was 40 years old.
Mhm.
And my English instructor would say to me, I really worked on, how should I say, not using just normal languaging in my writing in that class. And she would write little notes in the sidelines that said, it's so nice to have a little bit of a literary interjection into this piece of writing, or it was so nice to have something of the news of the day, or she'd say things like that. And I thought, that's really something to remember and to think about, is that really adds interest to your writing, and it makes your writing unforgettable. And what is it?
Mhm.
It makes you want to pick up things by that author too,
Mhm.
right?
The interesting thing about this book that I just read was the person, I believe it would the author was from Norway or Denmark, Sweden, something like that. And there were no quotation marks in this book.
Oh, so you didn't know when
Yeah.
it was conversation.
Well, it was
Interesting.
conversation. You could tell it was conversation, but they didn't indicate it with quotation with any quotation marks. And so the
Oh,
page was a lot less cluttered.
uh-huh.
Your eyes, you when you got into the story, you could you heard the voices, but it wasn't because of the quotation marks.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
So
does
anyway, I
anybody
just
say
wanted
you
to,
have to have them?
I don't think so. No. Yeah.
That's a very interesting idea.
So I
When you were
wanted
in,
to
real
bring up,
quick, when you were in school, did you have reading lists that books that you had to read like over the summer for your for your English class and
no.
stuff? Boy, we did, and they were, they were books I would have never read if I had had those have to read English lists. And I think there were things that now are kind of things everybody reads, but um, uh, oh gosh, so many things. Even George Orwell's 1984 was on my reading list one summer, and
Now I graduated in 1983, so that was
uh,
Animal Farm and 1984 were top,
was
top.
Animal Farm the one with the pigs?
That was the one with the pigs, yes.
Yeah, that one was on my reading list too. And there were so many, of the classics and things like that that, they were a little heavier reading and,
Mhm.
for a high school person. And yet I think it was really valuable to have had
Now,
those
speaking of
lists.
that, when I was commuting back and forth to my teaching position, what
Uh-huh.
I would do when I first discovered audiobooks from the
Uh-huh.
public library, I would get a fiction and then I would do a classic and then a fiction and a classic.
Okay.
And that was really, really good for me because I was able to listen to a couple of books and two come to my mind. The first one that I read that was a classic that I would have never, ever been able to read was Last of the Mohicans. And
Oh,
that was just the language in it was really thick. And I was able to read it and understand it because I listened to it in half-hour chunks of time and and it was a long book. I don't know if you've ever seen that puppy, but
yeah, it's
it's
thick.
pretty
Yeah.
significant. And as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, I could have never read this book.
Mhm.
And the other book that I listened to, that I felt like I read, I'm not sure the author, but it was called The Red Tent. And it was a story about a biblical woman from the Old Testament
Mhm.
and about the nuances and the culture of being a woman back in those times.
You
And the
talked
red,
about that on one of our walks one day.
yes, and it was fascinating and so just different and something I would never pick up, because it once again a real thick book. And I recommended it to a couple of people, and everybody who I recommended it to said they couldn't get into it. And I really credit audiobooks for helping me get into that book. And it was just so rich and complex. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Now, so
Yeah.
I think there is a place for audiobooks. Maybe not in
I
book.
think you're right. I think you're right. The other problem I have is sometimes I get so into my audiobook that I kind of don't pay as close of attention to what's going on outside of my car as I should.
When I was reading a book, sometimes I did miss my exit. And but my anyway, that's a whole nother story. So I wanted to
Okay,
kind of move forward from here, Judy. Let's
I'm
just
ready.
talk about, you talk about you and I have talked about when you pick up a really good nonfiction book,
Mhm.
you have discovered something about yourself and the way you read those books. Why don't you go into a little confessional here?
As long as you don't give me a whole lot of stuff I have to do afterwards to get over it.
No penance, no, 6 times around the rosary or anything for you. You can confess and it doesn't go any farther.
Well, I would pick up a book. I think I told you the story about having a really bad day when we owned the furniture store, and I walked out at lunch and I said, I just need a book that I need a um what did I call it? Like a guidebook for life, but that wasn't the right word. It was yeah, I'll think of it. But I went to the bookstore at lunchtime and I was going through the self-help books and I picked up a book and I opened it up and the little dedication that they have, and it said in a second thing, excuse me, that it was uh, a manual for living life or something of that nature. I could look at the book, but I won't. And I picked that book up and I read about 3 chapters of it.
There
Okay.
at the bookstore?
No, but in that day that
Okay.
I so needed it. I used to kind of get in trouble with my other co-owner because he just did not see the value in reading, and now I see him spending most of his day reading. So I think he's changed his opinion. But anyway, I tend to pick up the book and I read what's on the front cover, then I flip it over and I read what's on the back cover. Is this what you're talking about?
Yes. Move your
And then
microphone a little bit closer to your mouth again.
I read I don't know what's going on with this thing. Then I read the table of contents and I read each chapter, what the chapters, how the progression works. And then I'll read if there's a preface or an introduction to the book, I'll read that. And then I'll kind of just skim through the book. And what's interesting is I've done this for years and I can actually be with people that are discussing the book and I feel like I'm right with them. So I almost feel like I've read the book. Now, I am not a speed reader. I'm quite a slow reader. But when I do that process, I don't feel that how do I put it? I don't feel that I've missed it. I feel like I got it. And I'm sure if I read the book, reading every page, maybe faster than what I normally do, I'd pick up more information. But I really don't feel that I've missed that much. Yeah, but I've been unable to let go of any of my books because I know that one day I'm going to want to read them. But, I don't know. I'm getting older. I may not live long enough to read all my books.
I back in the day, Oprah had her book club when it first
Yes.
started, and I had a goal to read all of Oprah's book club's books. And, they were really good. I mean, most of them I really, really enjoyed. There were a couple of them I was like, yeah, I'm of the firm belief when you start a book, you have to finish
You
it.
have to finish it. I know,
Yeah.
me too. I'm that way.
And I've heard so many people say there is a rule in life. You do not need to finish books. And I just can't not. I mean, literally, I can probably count on one hand the books that I've started that I haven't finished.
Did you read Beloved?
No. Mm-mm.
That was one that I tried to put down several times because I just wasn't understanding it. And I
Mm.
made myself finish it, but I'm still not sure that I really got the whole genre of the book because that was one of the few on Oprah's list that I could have easily not finished that book. It just
Okay.
wasn't holding my attention. And it was definitely culturally different from what I knew the answers to. And so it was a challenge for me
Mhm.
to read. But
Yeah.
yeah. And okay, I want to know, when are you going to make your list?
Well, here is the deal. I want to have it made in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
So, I really feel like this list would be valuable for me for a couple of different things. First of all, as I said before, it helps make me an interesting person. Okay.
Mhm.
The other thing that I think is as you get older, I think reading helps you to keep your mind sharp.
I think so too.
I think reading helps you stay current. It gives you perspective on people and their lives, and what you read causes us to expand out of our the little boxes, the little worlds that we put ourselves in, and we're able to understand the greater world around us. And I think that's really valuable in today's time and climate.
Well, it's a much more, our world has expanded. And if we
Yes.
only understand our little corner of it, I think it really limits our ability to relate to people
Mhm.
who have lived a totally different life. And
Right.
even our own children. I mean, my children have traveled much further than I have ever thought of
Mm.
traveling. Especially Kylie. I mean, she's been to Egypt, she's been to Cairo, she's been to Darfur, she's been to
Mhm.
places all over, and has all kinds of fascinating stories to tell. She's been to Japan a couple of times, and Matt went to Japan when he was 15. I mean,
Mhm.
and at that time he had taken 4 years of Japanese, and he actually could kind of, it's a tough language, but he could kind of relate to the people. He stayed with a family for a week, so that was neat.
Mhm.
But I think if we're limited in our exposure, it was interesting. We did our writing this week about our worst cooking mistake or
Yeah.
nightmare, and I was reading about palate cleansers and kind of trying to come up with, where that came from and what that was about. And
Mhm.
apparently it's used a lot more in other countries than it is
Mm.
here, especially in the European countries. And
Really?
it's used when one side of the palate cleanser is a food that's kind of high in fat, and it literally is to clean the fat from your tongue and your mouth so that you can enjoy the taste of, and not to sound gross, but that was kind of what I
Kind of.
what I learned. It is kind of gross, yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought to myself, well, of course that would be something Michael would pick up on because he's been to Europe so many times. He had a brother that lived in Switzerland, and his sister-in-law still lives there, and he, yeah, and he studied cooking with people that were quite worldly, so he picked that up. But it would seem strange to us who really have only, well, I had my first Chinese food when I moved to Texas, of all
Oh,
places.
there. Well, that's a natural having Chinese food in Texas, a
It was
natural.
crazy.
So
I mean,
what you asked me for is, um,
your
it,
list.
yeah. So I really feel like, I should have a list for myself because I'm finding myself kind of like sliding down the hill of that area in my own personal evolution and improve self-improvement.
Hmm.
And isn't that what we're really focusing on now with the podcast? We
Yes, it
are
is.
encouraging people to continue to grow and develop and learn and be vibrant into our midlife
Expand
years.
their ideas. I mean, if the only thing you did was read 30 books a year and took those thoughts and used them in conversation, as you've stated several times, you'd be a much more interesting person.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm what I'm hoping here is I have kind of put out the all call, and that is what this podcast today ultimately is doing. I want to put out the all call to anybody who listens to this to comment on either the podcast site or somewhere in our Sidetracked Sisters or DM me, message me directly on Facebook somewhere. I can get that. And let me know what books you'd recommend. Because we have a number of different writings out there on the Sidetracked Sisters site. We have all of these podcasts that we've done. So I think people have kind of getting to know us. And if you don't, you can listen to old podcasts and get to know Judy and me. Yep, that Judy and me. Um, and I really want to refocus some of my energy on growing and learning and developing in this way because it's been fun for me in the past. And like I said, I've kind of like dropped off in this area and I miss it. I miss it a lot.
Well, I
So
think
I
when you
asked
were,
Caden
uh-huh.
to make some recommendations. And I'm kind of putting that all call out to my literary friends. I've been looking at other people's recommendations. I looked at the Goodreads site for their recommendations. And I don't, I'm open to both fiction, nonfiction. I'm open to classics.
Hmm.
Um, I'm, I tend personally to stay away from I mean, even our podcast, Judy, the books that I've read over the last year have mostly been memoirs. I wonder why.
I wonder why. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and that has
That
been
fits.
so fabulous. I had never really had a lot of interest in that genre before, and it has been so enriching for me. And the fact that then I was able to talk to the actual authors on this podcast
That was
was
like
like
a double plus.
mind blowing.
Mhm.
So I really feel that the books that we read can cause us to grow and develop and enhance ourselves in so many different ways. That
I think you're right, and
why
I think
not?
it also enhances our writing, and
Mm, yeah.
it makes us take that memoir that we read and think about, well, how does that match with my life, and what would I write down if I was going to write a memoir? It's thought provoking, and I think we need our thoughts provoked once in a while. I
We
think
need
we
to have
can.
our thoughts provoked on a regular basis, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
Did I make up another word? I
I
probably
think
did.
yes. Uh-huh.
And especially one of the things I love about our podcast is that I can be feeling all blue and down in the dumps and having my pity party, and we get on our podcast, and I feel so much better. I find it expands my mind just to
Yeah.
think about to think the thoughts that you're thinking about. It feels really, really good. And with the world and the condition it's in, with people being worried about the economy and worried about money and worried about this and worried about that, I've actually found myself, if I find myself worrying, I say to myself, stop it. That's a wasted emotion. Use that time and pick up something good to read instead. And I used to get so jealous of Michael because when I was getting ready to go somewhere, putting on makeup, fixing my hair, doing all of that, what he was doing? Reading.
Hmm.
And he would read in every little snippet of time that he could find. And he used to put out enormous amount of books that he read. Now, a lot of his were he likes crime novels and detective stuff, James Patterson and stuff like that.
Well, and I do love, the fact that, back in the day, um, I was challenging myself to read, the fiction and the classics.
Hmm.
I think that it is, I mean, I think we all can also get in a rut of reading all the same kind of book, all of, you know, crime or,
I
or
really
even,
like that.
nonfiction, self-help books. Yeah, you and I, we love ourselves a self-help book.
We really do, and we learn from them. I'm sitting here. My thought that I'm having is, Lisa, when can I come over and browse through your library? Because there's several of your books I want to read, and I promise I won't keep them. I just want to read them. But you might have to ask me back for them a time or two, because sometimes I forget. And I know as I've been going through books, I have books here that I quote. What do they call this when you go like that?
Air quotes.
Borrowed, when I was living in California, and I keep thinking some of these people, I
Ooh.
have no idea where they are, and I still have their books, and that's really not a good thing. But um what I like about your books is they're more current. They're not the 30 years old books that I have. And not that there's not value in those, but some of those I could literally do my little quick synopsis through them, and they could be over. I wouldn't have to read them through cover to
Right,
cover.
right. But would
So,
you still keep them?
oh, of course.
Of course. Now, you want to know, I mean, we can kind of wrap this up here by me saying that is a very important question. One of the things that happened to me, um, oh, jeepers, right before we got the boys, I have a library in the house and it has bookshelves. And I, what happened? We had just, mother didn't have the cottage yet. And I had been saving, I had bought all of Oprah, the Oprah Book Club books. I had boxes and shelves and shelves of awesome books that I loved. And I was feeling really bad. I was feeling like things weren't moving forward in my life. And so I took all my books that I loved and I put them in diaper boxes. And I think I had 5 or 7 diaper boxes full of my favorite books. And I took them to school like it was every other day. And I put them on the lounge table and said, take them, read them, have fun. I gave them all away. And it was
Wow.
after then I gave them away that we got the adoption for the boys came through.
Mhm.
It was almost like I had to we've talked about this before, clear out some room for that new energy to come in.
Yeah, I can actually see that, and because I've actually reached a point now where I'll say, "Oh, I can't buy another book. I've got so many." But you're right. I need to start weeding out and going through, and I have the other problem that I now have all of Michael's books, and I'd say he had as many books as I did, and so you combine them. And I told you, this house in a tornado will never go anywhere because it's weighted down with books. But I've actually paid to have those books transferred across the country a couple times, and that's kind of silly. But
Okay.
then I come up with something like last week where I couldn't find books, so who
Yeah,
knows?
you have all of Dr. Wayne Dyer's books, 7 of them you said,
7, at least
and
7.
we're needing them. You wanted to read it and you couldn't
Yeah,
find it.
so something's not, if you have so many of anything that you can't find what you need among it, you need to do something
That's a
different.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, because what good is it to own them if you don't know where they are? So
Okay. Well,
I agree. I would love to have people recommend books to us, and I'd like to see. I don't think I could ever do 150 in a year. That's a lot. But I think that aiming for like what, 5 a month would be decent, or 4 a month.
that I was gonna say 2 a month.
Okay. Okay. I mean, it kind of depends on the book. I mean, if you're reading Last of the Mohicans, that might be different than if you're reading, a 150-page ebook or something like that. So, but I think it's good to have something to shoot for there. And
Well, and I did read, what is it? The Boy, the Mole, the Horse, and the Fox. Did you
something like
ever?
that.
Yeah. And that I just sat down and read that. That was, it's a thought-provoking, poetic, beautiful adult children's book.
Whoa, that's a mouthful. That
Yeah,
was one of your Christmas presents, wasn't it?
it was. And that was lovely. I've got that on my nightstand right now. And so I think there are going to be some short books. And I think it would be fun like I said, I will before the end of January put out a blog post probably and kind of talk about that.
Okay,
So,
that sounds good.
what our goal is,
Mhm.
some of the books that have been recommended, and where we're going with this.
There's even a few people on our list that I know are reading our stuff that I'd really like to put out a special DM to them asking them for suggestions, because there are people that don't comment, but I know that several of them I was in book clubs with
Oh,
back
okay.
in the day, and they read excellent books. And that reminds me, there's one book you have to pick up, and that is Women Who Run with the Wolves. Even though that's an old book, I loaned that to you, and I'll bet you haven't read it. But that'd be a good one to do a chapter at a time.
Hmm. That's a big, thick book.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the woman, the woman
yeah.
that wrote it is, I can never remember the name, but she's like considered to be a world renowned storyteller.
Okay.
It starts with a C. They have a name.
Don't have any idea what word you're talking about.
I'll find out.
Okay.
You can
Okay.
just tell I'm full of all kinds of intellectual things tonight, making up words and forgetting others and whatever. So this has been great, and I'm really looking forward to our audience giving us some good juicy suggestions.
Yeah, because like I said, I've kind of slipped back a little bit in that area, and I want to be encouraged and motivated to continue to live and grow and develop and create and have community. And books are a fun way to do all of those things. So let's
They
do that
definitely
together
are.
and before we move forward, we got to figure out what books that's going to entail. And I'm excited about that.
I love it. I think it's a great idea. Thank you for that, Lisa.
Cool.
Okay.
So until next time, Judy, love you.
Love you too. It's
Okay.
been real.
Okay.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.